A very good afternoon to our speaker today, Mr. V.S. Sundaresan, Chief General Manager, SEBI, and Sri Murali Krishna Garu, DGM SEBI, and Venkateswara Garu, Manager SEBI, and faculty colleagues and student friends. It is my privilege to introduce the speaker, Mr. V.S. Sundaresan today. He is currently working as Chief General Manager, SEBI, since July 1989. He is presently heading the investigation department, which examines the alleged violations of various security laws by entities associated with securities market. His past assignments include formulation and enforcement of regulations and public issues, takeovers, buyback, listing and delisting, policies for trading, clearing and settlement of transactions, and risk management in stock exchanges and depositories. He is a graduate in commerce with postgraduate in finance and human resource. He also holds a degree in law. As NELSAR offers the combination of law and management, we have the best resource today. So now I welcome sir and open the session for him. Sir, please carry on.
Yeah, it's working.
From the airport, I went to my office, and from there I didn't expect that there will be so much of traffic. So you have to excuse me for that, and I hope that the 15 minutes which you have delayed, it is worth waiting for, and you will definitely get the best from the next 2 hours. First of all, I thank the NELSAR University, the faculty, Mr. Murthy, and my colleagues from SEBI office to give me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on this subject on takeovers. It is one of my favorite subjects which I have been doing in SEBI for close to 27 years. And in Bombay, or if you ask any of the practicing company secretaries or chartered accountants, and if you talk about the subject of takeover, and if you refer the name of SEBI, invariably people will ask, you have to consult Mr. Sundaresan for that. Because I have taken a lot of interest in this, I have done a lot of research on that, I have done a lot of case studies, and fortunately I was there from the time when this takeover code was introduced in SEBI since 1994, and therefore I developed a lot of interest in this subject. And that's why when Mr. Murali Krishnan requested me that can I come all the way from Bombay to share on this subject, I immediately said yes. Because this is an occasion where when you interact with the students, you try to learn more. Because the younger generation thinks very differently from the older generations like me. You are all more tech savvy, though we at this age are trying to become tech savvy, find it very difficult. Because my daughter, who is 9 years old, knows more about how to operate this, what you call smartphone and the iPhone, which I am not able to do it. So it is always a pleasure talking to people who are younger than you, and in the process, we actually learn from you. So today's session, what I have done is that I will first give you a brief of the takeover regulations which SEBI is administering, and that will be for about 45 minutes. Then during my sessions, I always feel that if you do a case study, it will give more insight on the subject, and it will also prompt you to think and ask more questions. And in the process, the learning will be much more and much faster and much sharper. So in the second session, we will do a case study. I have already circulated the case also. I am sure, if not all, some of you would have read the case, and then I don't know, some very few of you might have even searched in the Google whether any such case is there and what is the decision of SEBI and other things. So we will have a discussion on that. And then I will tell you the final conclusion, how SEBI decided on that case and why we decided so and what are the issues which are arising out of that. And you are free to ask any questions in beginning. I will not get disturbed because whatever I am going to speak is from my heart. Because whatever I know and take over, I am going to share with you. So you are free to interrupt me and I have no problem at all. If I know, I will answer. If I don't know, I will definitely admit that I don't know. Because I am not encyclopedia of securities market. Whatever I have learned in 27.5 years in SEBI, I will share with you. Okay? Now, how many of you are familiar with SEBI? That's good. So my job is much easier now. SEBI has been there for more than 28 years and it has been trying to do a lot of reforms in the securities market, and over a period of time we have made the securities market more transparent, more secure and bringing more products and more investors to the market. And I have just tried to put from the time SEBI was formed in 2002 as a regulatory body, although it was actually formed in 1988 and I joined SEBI in 1989. Though now 1988 to 1992 it was a administrative body, and in 1992 SEBI Act was passed and SEBI became a statutory body. So from 1992 onwards, these are the various reforms SEBI has brought over a period of time. And if you see, no economic paper is printed on a daily basis without printing those 4 letters SCBI. Because SEBI has been contributing so much to the economic growth of the country, where it helps the investors to invest in a product which is more, gives better return than the inflation rate, and it is also safe to invest as compared to many other instruments. But for the purpose of generating that investments, there should be people to take it also. So there has to be a one hand supply, there has to be demand on the other side. So SEBI has been playing the role of developing the market as well as regulating the market. SEBI's preamble is basically 3. One is to develop the market, to regulate the market and protect the interest of investors in the market. So whatever SEBI does, the main object of SEBI is to ensure that the investors who are going to invest money in the market, their interests are protected. So that is why we are slightly slow in making certain reforms, because we do not want the investors to get exposed to different types of risk. And if we see a country like India as compared to other developed markets, investors' education is not that forward. The entire financial system is such that it is slowly developing, and the awareness of the investors where to invest, how to invest is not there. So therefore, education has also been carried forward, and I understand from my colleague in Hyderabad office that they are inviting the college students on a weekly basis and they are conducting programs for students from the colleges itself. So that the students at this age, they will have the right perception of the securities market, and when they earn and when they have surplus to invest, they will be able to take informed decisions. Otherwise, what people are doing is by word of mouth. Somebody says, you put money in this, they put money. And if the money is lost, whom they will blame? The person who guided them. One has to take an informed decision. For that purpose, you must have proper knowledge about the product, knowledge about the market, knowledge about the process. So SEBI has been trying to reform by putting in various reforms in the form of introducing new products, in the form of changing the process to reduce the risk, and at the same time bringing more investors to the market. Whether it is an Indian investor, whether it is foreign investor. And the latest development, if you see in the last year, the Forward Market Commission was merged with SEBI. So even the commodities, which is being the futures market in commodity, which was regulated separately by a regulator, was merged with SEBI in 2015, and even the word commodities has been brought as part of the securities definition under SCRA. That is Securities Contract Regulation Act. So if you see the various reforms, Dematerialization was one of the very major reform which is brought in the Indian securities market. Most of you would not recognize if somebody shows you a tax certificate. Because from the time you are born, at this, most of you, there is no physical certificate at all. Today everything is done in Demat. Even if you go to a broker with a physical certificate, he may not entertain you. Because the physical certificate has become so risky today. Whether it is original, whether it is duplicate, whether it is triplicate, how many such certificates exist, nobody will know. Therefore, physical certificate has almost been eliminated from the system. So dematerialization was one of the very important reform brought by SEBI in 1994. Then thereafter, index derivatives, then options, futures, and so many new products were introduced. So that the investors, depending upon their risk appetite, will be able to decide which product they want to invest. If you see 25 years, there will be only two products. Either there will be a debt or there will be a equity. But today, if you see, there will be more than 50 products for an investor to choose. Whether it is a mutual fund, there will be multiple schemes. Whether there is a portfolio manager, then you can give the portfolio manager the option to manage. Or if you have a savvy investor, you yourself can directly enter the market. You have equity, you have debt, you have ETF, you have options, you have futures, you have single stock futures, you have index options, index futures. We have multiple products to trade. The more the products, the more the investors will come, there will be competition. And when competition is there, there will be price discovery. That is the objective, so that there is transparency, there is less of risk and more of safety to the investors. Then slowly we move on. Now today, as I said, technology is playing a very big role. Now algo trading has become very popular. High frequency trading is there. Now after some time, like we are hearing that the cars are being produced without driverless cars. So slowly, morning somebody has to put on the computer will automatically trade. You don't have to do anything. Only you should keep money in the bank account so that the money is there to pay. We are moving towards that stage where complete technology is taking over. And actually it is posing more and more risk. And as a regulator, we are doing as much capacity building as possible. And people like you, when you graduate, you come out, you should join SEBI, and then you should be able to protect the investors in future. Whatever best we are possible, we are doing, but maybe in the 10 years down the line, technology is going to play a much bigger role. And we are talking about cyber security, cyber attack, and all these things. So the technology is going to be the driving force in the next few years, and in all probability, the entire securities market will be completely dominated by technology. Now, moving ahead, now come to the today's topic of takeover. Takeover is an integral part of corporate restructuring. You know what is corporate restructuring? You might have studied in your corporate finance. Basically, corporate restructuring is when a company has been formed and it is running for some time, it decides how to grow further. Because if you do not grow, you will be eliminated from the system. So when you go from the school to college, from college to university, and from there much larger same way in the life cycle of a corporate, it has to either diversify or it has to grow. And in India, especially, this corporate restructuring has assumed a lot of significance after 1992. You know what is the significance of that year 1992 in Indian history? In the Indian financial history? Can anybody remember? What is the significance of 1992 in Indian? Not because SEBI Act has been formed. That is one reason. But on the entire financial system, something major change took place in 1992. Pardon, economic reforms. What did the major thing happen as part of the economic reform? globalization, the market was opened completely, the Indian economy was completely opened. The license lodge has been completely removed. And because of that, the global investors had the opportunity to enter. So because of this globalization and liberalization, the economy moved from controlled one to a market driven. Now in a market driven economy, what happens, I said, we all might have studied perfect competition. Actually in many sectors today you can see real perfect competition taking place. The new people come, the old one exists, and seeing the abnormal, see telecom sector is the best example. Whether we are charged correctly or not, we don't know. But definitely there is sufficient scope, substantial scope for the new entrants. That is why new players are coming. And in the product, in the process, there will be a competitive environment. So because of this competitive environment, there is a necessity on the part of the corporates to go for restructuring. You can no longer do whatever you are doing in the same way. Either you have to diversify your product line, or you have to change the process, or you have to enter the new market. If you do not do this on a regular basis, you will be removed from the market in a very short period of time. You take any corporate. You take, for example, Hindalco, that is Aditya Birla Group. From where to where they have grown now. You take Reliance Group. You see they are now in almost all the sectors. But if you see Reliance 25 years back, everybody will know that only as a petrochemical company. But today they are in consumer product. Once upon a time some of you might have bought Vimal, that is only a textile. Now today they are in consumer product, now they have entered telecom, they are in petrochemicals. And now if you see the full Reliance Group, they are in finance, they are in insurance. In every area they have diversified. So there was a necessity on the part of the industrial groups to go for restructuring. That is one side. On the other side, the investors' awareness has also gone up. Over a period of time, because of the technological movement, the investors' expectation on the promoters of the company to deliver had gone up. So they were demanding more and more. They were not satisfied if the 5% return is there or 10% return is there. They want the company where they invest, the market capitalization has to constantly grow, and therefore the demand from the investors on the corporates to perform better and better compelled them to go for restructuring. And what happened over a period of time after SEBI came into being, this control of capital issues has been abolished and the concept of free pricing has been introduced. Once upon a time before SEBI came into being, if somebody wants to raise equity from the public, they have to get permission from the Ministry of Finance, that is that from the control of capital issues. Government will decide which company can raise money, how much they can raise money, at what price they can raise money, when they can raise money. All these things was decided by the government. But today, that has completely changed. You might have seen ICICI Prudential Life public issue, you might have seen Ratnakar Bank public issue, L&T Infotech, all these recent public issues have come and the market is becoming bigger and bigger and more companies are raising money and they are getting listed. So because of that, there is a compulsion on the industrial groups, on the corporates to go for restructuring. Now what are the various methods of restructuring? Again, you might have studied in your corporate finance. What are the methods adopted by the corporates to grow more and more? You know what is scheme of arrangement? Under Companies Act section 391 to 394. Somewhere somebody talked to you company law. Do you remember? Because why I am saying 391, 394 is in the new Companies Act 2013, the provisions pertaining to scheme of arrangement have not yet been notified. They have not come into force. So the old Companies Act, these provisions continue to exist and continue to be in operation. Most of the sections pertaining to the operations of the company are now in 2013 Companies Act, but for scheme of arrangement, we have to go back to provisions of 391 to 394 of Companies Act 1956. Then we have this takeover, then we have buyback, then the last one is called delisting. These are all the various methods by which companies can go for restructuring. Now, out of these things, SEBI has direct control, direct regulatory power on takeover, buyback and delisting. Because the scheme of arrangement is there in the Companies Act, it is the High Court which decides. What SEBI or the ROC or the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, what we can do is, if there is a scheme of arrangement, we can give our observations to the court. Whether it is good for the investors, whether it is not good for the investors, whether the scheme is good or bad, what should be done. But it is for the High Court to decide whether the scheme can be approved or not. But as far as the remaining three aspects, whether it is takeover, buyback or delisting, it is under the complete regulatory framework of SEBI. So what SEBI has done, SEBI has put in place the rules of the game in respect of these three: takeover, buyback and delisting. But if you see in the economic papers or you just Google it, you will get that the word takeover and buyback is predominantly used interchangeably. But there is a sea of difference between these two words. So if you are, as a student, if you are learning, my first point to tell you is that when there is a takeover, don't say there is buyback. When there is a buyback, don't say there is takeover. Because these two things are completely different. Now, how they are different? You know what is an IPO? Anybody can tell what is IPO? Initial public offer. Okay. In initial public offer, when the company makes an initial public offer, what happens? What is the process? What happens in an initial public offer? Anybody has applied for a public offer? Anyone has applied? Okay. Very good. Correct. Okay. That's correct, absolutely right. But the point pertaining to here is, in an IPO, the company issues shares. The company issues fresh shares. If the company's capital is 100, in an IPO, the company's capital gets increased. From 100, they may go to 200. So, in an IPO, the company issues fresh capital to the public, and then the share capital of the company increases. In an IPO, the share capital of the company increases. Now, what is the difference between IPO and the offer for sale? Okay. Slightly different. In an offer for sale, the company does not issue fresh shares to investors. The existing shareholder who holds substantial shares in the company, he sells his shares to the public at large. So what happens is, in an IPO, the share capital of the company undergoes a change, but in an offer for sale, the shareholding pattern of the company undergoes a change. Earlier, in a company which is not listed, 100% capital of the company is held by promoters of the company. There won't be any public shareholding in a company which is unlisted. But when a company comes out with an IPO and gets listed on the stock exchange, through a process of IPO, then what happens? Companies has got two types of shareholders. One is called promoter shareholder, the other one is called public shareholder. But when the same process takes place in the form of offer for sale, the prominent or a substantial shareholder sells his shares, who is normally the promoter, he sells his shares to the public. So, in offer for sale, what happens is, the share capital of the company does not change. Shareholding pattern changes. Earlier, person A was holding 100 shares. He sells 25 shares of his 100, out of his 100 to the public. So his shareholding comes down to 75, public holds 25. The share capital of the company remains the same as 100. So this is the difference between IPO and offer for sale. Now, if you see takeover, takeover is the reverse of offer for sale. When there is a takeover, somebody who wants to become a substantial shareholder, he makes an offer to the public and say that I will buy from you. In an offer for sale, the substantial shareholder sells his stake to the public. In a takeover, I want to become a substantial shareholder, so I will tell the people who are having shares of the company and approach them that I want to become a substantial shareholder, so please sell your shares to me. Nothing happens to the share capital of the company. That is why when there is a takeover taking place, the company is not disturbed. The share capital of the company does not get disturbed. Whereas, in case of a buyback, it is the reverse of the IPO process. When a company does a buyback, the shares are purchased by the company back, the payment is made by the company to the public, and as per the provisions of the law, the share capital has to be reduced. So in an IPO, the share capital of the company goes up. When there is a buyback, the share capital of the company comes down. So now you tell me whether takeover and buyback is one and the same? But you open the Google, you open any newspaper, they will tell that it is buyback. That is the misfortune in this system. So if you have said that I have learned to take over, somebody came and talked to me on takeover, please do not use the word interchangeably. When there is a takeover, nothing happens to the share capital of the company. The shareholding pattern changes. But whenever there is a buyback, the share capital of the company has to mandatorily undergo a change. Yes, madam. I have not yet come to the SEBI takeover code. It's only 3. You are asking a question which should be asked at 4 o'clock. There is a movie, in Hindi, Jaane Tu Jaane Na or something, where the person used to explain something in the airport. Everybody will ask, what happened next, what happened next? So, if the climax is told at the beginning itself, then nobody will be in the movie complex, no. I will come to that point. I will tell you. So, this is the difference between the takeover and the buyback. SEBI has a separate regulatory framework for takeovers, separate regulatory framework for buyback. Now we will go to why do we have a takeover code first of all? The main reason is, whenever there is a takeover, what happens is that, let us take a company called X, or let us take a live company. Today if you talk about Reliance Industries, whose name comes to your mind immediately? If you think of Reliance Industries, whose name will come to your mind first? Mr. Mukesh Ambani, richest Indian, let us use Mr. Mukesh Ambani. He is the richest Indian. Now, Tomorrow Mr. Mukesh Ambani says, I am no longer interested in this company. I am going to give this company to Mr. Aditya Birla to run the company. If you are a shareholder of Reliance and you have put the money that Mr. Mukesh Ambani is at the hem of the affairs, and tomorrow if Mr. Mukesh Ambani and the Ambani group is going out and somebody else is coming in, would you like to think of your investment or you would like to continue? So whether you have to be given an option or you should not be given an option. Will you not expect that if somebody is exiting from the company, you should also be given an option to exit? So the purpose is, whenever some substantial change take place in the company, the minority shareholders have to be informed and they have to be given an option whether you want to continue with the change or you also want to move out. This process, when the takeover takes place, an option has to be given to the minority shareholders, which is called in our parlance equality of treatment of all shareholders. This is the fundamental principle of takeover code. Equality of treatment of all shareholders. All shareholders, whether you hold 100 shares, whether you hold 1,000 shares, whether you hold 1 crore shares, you should be treated equally. Whatever facilities or the opportunities given to one shareholder, the same opportunity has to be extended to other shareholders. Equality of treatment of all shareholders. The second aspect is, what type of person who is going to come, why is he coming into this company, what is he going to do, all that has to be disclosed to the shareholders at large, so that the shareholder can take an informed decision whether to exit or to continue. So the second aspect of takeover code is to provide disclosures to the investors. Somebody may buy the shares in the market. So that person should know that 1 year down the line, this company is going to be run by X and not by Y, or run by B but not by A. So he must have full information to take an informed decision. And the third aspect is, whatever the exit is given, it should be at a fair price. Just because Mr. Mukesh Ambani and his family is having 54% in Reliance, they should not get X price, and just because you are having 100 shares, you should be given X minus price. The concept is, or equality of treatment what to exit as well as to exit at a proper price. A fair price has to be paid. Once it is given, it is for the shareholder to decide whether to continue with the company or to exit from the company. So keeping that in mind, the takeover regulations are being framed. Now as I said, these takeover regulations did not come overnight. That means takeovers were not taking place before SEBI came into being. SEBI came into being only in 1992. So before that, who was regulating takeovers? There were companies listed. Which was the first takeover in Indian context? Anybody remembers? All are having computer, you don't Google it, you will get the answer. Anybody remembers which was the first takeover in Indian system? There was a hostile bid. You have heard Dr. Swaraj Paul. He is from London, UK. He made an attempt on which company? Escorts, E-S-C-O-R-T-S, Escorts. Now, before SEBI came into being, the regulatory framework was there in the form of two clauses in the listing agreement. You know what is a listing agreement? When a company comes with an IPO and gets listed on the stock exchange, the company has to enter into an agreement with the stock exchange that these are all the terms and conditions which they will comply during the process of listing and when the shares of the company continue to remain listed. So the listing agreement had two clauses, clauses 40A and 40B. So when SEBI came into being, SEBI framed the regulatory provisions for takeovers in 1994. And we found that there were a lot of loopholes in that and it was being exploited. So we revamped the regulations in 1997. And this 1997 regulations took the test of time for close to 14 years. And in 2011, we have further changes we have made, and now this is the regulation which is in force. Now, in the next 15-20 minutes, I will tell about the major provisions of these regulations. What are the vital aspects of this takeover code? As I said, why there is a takeover code? To provide equality of treatment. How do we ensure that? What are the various aspects? First is that, what is a trigger point? At what stage this takeover regulation gets attracted? When did the obligation arise on the part of a person to comply with these regulations? Then if he has to comply, what are the rules of the game? Like we all know now in cricket and football, when it is called a no ball, the bowler should know no, before bowling. Which line he crosses, it will be called no ball. Where he bowls, it will be called wide. Similarly, in the football, the player should know whether he can kick the other player with the foot or he can push him with the hand. And what is the penalty for that also is known upfront. So in the regulatory framework, SEBI has put in place, if takeover regulations gets attracted, at what stage it gets attracted, and as and when it gets attracted, what is the rules of the game? So that is first is trigger point. Then there is a concept called indirect acquisition. We don't have board to write. Huh? Oh, achha, we have a skill. Okay. No issue. No issue. But I forgot to write in the email. So then there is a what type of offer size, what should be the offer price, and how the process goes through. All that is given in the takeover regulations. We will see one after the other. The first one is basically trigger point. When did the takeover regulations get attracted? Already she has prompted the answer. The first thing is when somebody reaches 25% of the working capital of your shares of the listed company. When a company shares are listed, if somebody buys 25% of the share capital, the takeover regulation gets triggered. That means you are considered as a substantial acquirer. You are an acquirer means the person who buys the share. Don't get worried about the technical jargons. Acquirer means the buyer. Whoever buys and he touches 25% of the working capital of the company, you are now triggering the takeover code. Now a person who is already above 25%. So you reach 25%, you comply with the law, and you go to 28 or 29 or 30%. Then what happens? Is the field open for you? Can you do anything? Can you buy any number of shares? I was told that the FAQ on takeovers was circulated to you. Anybody has read that? Yes. Very good. So, if somebody holds more than 25%, he can go on buying up to 5% in a financial year to reach up to 75%. Now, beyond 75%, one cannot go because there is minimum public shareholding of 25%. Earlier for public sector companies it was 90%, private sector it was 75%. Now all people are being brought under same stage. Whether it is a public sector, whether it is private sector, if you are a listed company, the public should hold at least 25%. But for some reason, if you are breaching that 25%, within 3 years' time, there is an obligation under law to come back to 75%. That provision is also there. That is there under Rule 19A of Securities Contract Regulation Rules. And it is also there in the SEBI listing agreement. Now it is called listing obligations and LODR, listing obligations and disclosure requirements. So, But under the takeover code, SEBI will not allow you to go beyond 75. But for some reason, I will come to that whenever you go. The law says within 1 year, either you have to come back to 75 by selling the excess, or you have to compulsorily go for delisting. So when you are making the open offer, you have to make a decision. Either you will come back to 75 in case you are crossing 75, or you should say that upfront I will go for delisting. We will come to that slide, I will explain that. There is one more concept. Can anyone tell? One is buying 25% or buying 5%. Will you attract the SEBI takeover code without buying any shares of a particular company? Is it possible? How? Yes. Yes. Very good. So this is another concept, acquisition, additional trigger by way of acquisition of control. That means you cannot have sufficient number of shares, but indirectly you can exercise control over the management affairs of the company. You can still trigger the takeover code. There is one more concept is there, which will come in, that is called indirect acquisition. Suppose there is a company A, 51% of the company is held by B, 51% of that company B is held by C, and somebody acquires the share capital of C. That is called the chain principle. And in that case, you will be required to make open offer and trigger the takeover code even for the company B as well as A, which is called indirect acquisition. One is called direct acquisition, that is when you buy the shares of a particular listed company. That is one way of triggering the takeover code. There is another way where you acquire a holding company of your one listed company, and in the process you acquire control over the listed entity. Then also you will be required to make an open offer and comply with the takeover code. Now, this was very simply told in 1997 regulations. Then somebody wanted, lot of queries arose as to how do you say that when I acquire a company, say in US. Now today, because of globalization, too much of complications have come even for lawmakers. I acquire a company in US. That company has another company in France. That company holds another company in Germany. That Germany company holds another company in UK. This UK company has some investment in Indian company. Now there is a transaction taking place to acquire the US company. There is nothing happens to the Indian company, nothing happens to the UK company, nothing happens to the company listed in Germany, nothing happens to the company listed in France. But something happens to the company which is the ultimate company in US. What shall we do? Does the investor in Indian listed company is eligible for exit option or no? How do you determine? How do you determine? In 1997 regulations it was not clear. Then there was lot of act splitting. Then the cases go to fight to Securities Appellate Tribunal, then we have to fight in Supreme Court and all these things. Therefore, to ensure that such type of problems do not arise, we have brought provision under indirect acquisition. What we have given in this was, if the company which is existing in India, how much it is contributing to the overall group of this company? What is its contribution? If it is merely contributing 10%, does it matter? If it merely contributes 20%, either in the form of revenue or in the form of profit or in the form of sales turnover, we have given 3 parameters, and in those parameters, if the contribution by the Indian company is equal to or more than 80%, then the indirect acquisition will be treated as direct acquisition. As if it is a direct acquisition, you have to comply with the law in respect of the Indian listed company. Earlier this percentage was not specified, so there were numerous litigations arising out of that. So SEBI, after discussion with the public and various jurisdictions available, we have now provided in the law itself, if the contribution of the Indian listed company towards the entire group, does it contribute 80% of its sales or NAV of the target company or the proportionate market cap of the overall group, if it is a substantial, that substantial is arrived at 80% equal to or more than, then it becomes an indirect acquisition, but for all practical purposes, it will be treated as direct acquisition, and whatever takeover code says, you have to comply with that. Then once you have triggered the code, what you have to do? This is very important. Now, once a person reaches 25% of the share capital of the company, voting rights of the company, he has to make an offer to the remaining shareholders. That is what the exit opportunity to the remaining shareholders. Now, here there is a debate across the globe. In some jurisdictions, it says that you have to give exit option to all the shareholders. That means all means 100% of the remaining shareholders. But in India, we have kept the number as what percentage? Anybody has read the FAQ? Pardon? 26, correct. That means he knows. So what we have provided is, you have to offer a minimum 26% of the working capital to the equal to 26%, you have to provide exit option. If there are more than 26% who is participating in the offer, then the allotment will be done on proportionate basis. Now there is a concept which was introduced in 2011 takeover code, which was not there in 1997, was in case you are already holding 40%, but you want to acquire, as per the law, you can acquire up to 5% in a financial year, which is called creeping acquisition. That is the terminology we use. But if you want to acquire more than 5%, you need not make a 26% offer, you can make an offer size of 10%. This provision was not there in 1997. So in 1997, it was actually minimum offer size of 20%, but in 2011, we have increased it to 26%, but we have also provided another option that if you are above 15%, above 25%, less than 75%, you can make a voluntary offer of 10%. There is no obligation to make for 26%. Can anyone ask this question? Why is it 26%? Why not 100%? Can anyone have an answer, or anyone can ask this question? Why are we not giving exit option to all the shareholders? Yes, madam, you know? Huh? That is one of the main reasons, you are absolutely right. So once you are at 25, and if you make an offer for 26, and if you successfully get this 26, you will reach 51. And in Indian context, if you hold 51%, you will have majority. Because most of the resolutions have to be passed with simple majority. Only for very specific provisions, you need 75% of the persons present and voting, which is called a special resolution under the Companies Act. So if most of the management of the affairs of the company can be done by ordinary resolution. To pass an ordinary resolution, you need only 51%. So if somebody has got 51%, he can comfortably run the company without any fear of hostile takeover. That is number one. The number two reason is, if you put the Google, you will get. In India, for the purpose of takeover, banking finance is not available. If you go to a bank and ask, please lend me 300 crores, I want to make an open offer and buy shares of Reliance Industries, banks are not permitted to do under RBI guidelines. So the people, the acquirer who wants to make an open offer and take over a company has to bring his own money. So there is a supply side constraint of funds. Therefore, we consciously kept it as 26% and not 100%. The third reason is, it is only an offer made. There is no obligation on the part of the shareholders who are having the shares to mandatorily tender the shares. It is only an option. So when we studied historically how many offers people have tendered, what is the percentage of response which have been received, we found that in most of the offers, there is majority, more than 90% or rather 92%, the response is less than 25%. That means if I want to buy 100 shares, only 25% is able to sell to me. So why should we make an obligation which does not exist at all? So these are the various reasons why we have kept it at 26, but in almost all jurisdictions, when I show you the jurisdictional comparison, you will see that the exit option has to be given to all the shareholders. It is only in India that we have this 26% because of these reasons. Now the next is we move to offer price. Now at what price the exit option has to be given? Can it be any price? At what price? Huh? Well, how to arrive at reasonable? How will you arrive at reasonable? What is reasonable? What is reasonable price? Pardon?
Marginal profit.
Profit. Can profit be the criteria? So, SEBI has provided a formula. There are two types of shares which are listed. One is called frequently listed, the other one is called infrequently listed. Now, what is frequently listed is, if the number of shares traded on the stock exchange during a year is 10% or more, it is called frequently traded. So, if there is a trading pattern, then you take the volume weighted average price, VWAP it is called, volume weighted average price of this 52 weeks, that is 1 year. In 97 regulations it was 5% and 26 weeks, now we have increased it to 10% and 52 weeks. That is the difference between 97 and 2000. So that you take a broader framework, within that you get the volume weighted average price. Or any other acquisition which this acquirer has made in the last 12 months, whichever is the higher you have to pay. And or volume weighted average price during 60 days prior to the public announcement. I will tell you what is PA, public announcement. So you calculate the price under these 4 parameters, whichever is the highest you have to give that price. So that the idea is that whoever wants to take over a company, he knows upfront what is going to be his cost. It is not that after, it is like before you join that they said, now what is the fees you have to pay for next 4 years or 5 years course. If they say only first year fees is known, second year fees is not known, how many of you will join? Is it fair? Yes. So before you join a 5-year course, you have to be told what is the total cost for 5 years. Similarly, before you enter into this corporate restructuring and if you want to do a takeover, you must know what is going to be your cost of acquisition. And that is why this formula is given. Suppose if the company's shares are not traded, then what happens? How will you arrive at the price? Now, it is left to the merchant banker, but there is a formula given by the Supreme Court in Hindustan Lever and Brook Bond merger case. So that is the formula which is used. That it takes 3 values, based on book value of the company, net asset value of the company, and one more, and the average of that is given. So the price is determined by the merchant banker by applying those formulas and then justifying that why he is paying this price, if it is infrequently traded, so that the investor gets a fair price. That is the objective of the entire regulation, that you should get exit price which is fair. You may or may not accept. There is no compulsion to tender the shares. Okay. Now, if it is indirect acquisition, the whatever price you calculate, you have to pay 10% more add to that, because there is a time difference between what you acquire and you actually make a open offer in India. For example, if you acquire a company in US and there is a company which is in India, in the 97 regulation we were insisting that you should make a simultaneous offer in US as well as in India. But suppose the open offer you make in US fails. To put it humorously, you get the cow but not the calf. Then what happens? Today if you have seen the Times of India paper, there is a tussle between the real mother of your child and a poster mother of your child. The High Court says mothering is as important as giving birth to a child. So similarly, you will get the mother but you don't get the child. Or it will happen the other way. You will get the calf, your open offer will be successful in India, but you will not get the holding company. So to avoid that type of dichotomy, in the 2011 regulations we have said that after you complete the acquisition there, depending upon the success, you can make the open offer here to avoid any sort of complications. In that case, you are getting time, and time is money. So we said that the price, whatever you calculate, you increase it by 10%. That means price X plus, that is 110%. Now the offer process. So you have decided how much to buy, how much, at what price, which company, who are the shareholders, all have been identified. Now the process starts. First you have to make a public announcement. The day you decide to take over your company, that means you want to cross 25% or acquire control over your company, you have to make a public announcement inform the stock exchange. Then within 5 days, you have to make a detailed public statement. That is called DPS. In that detailed public statement, all the details will come, like a IPO, somebody said you engage a merchant banker. Then in the newspaper you have to give who is the person who is buying, which company shares he is buying, why is he buying, what is his interest in this company, how many shares he held before, how many he is proposing to buy, after buying this company what he is intending to do, what is his future plan of action. All that has to be disclosed in the DPS. That is called detailed public statement. Then after that, he has to, like IPO, you have to file an offer document with SEBI. Now SEBI will see whether the disclosures made in the offer document are fair, whether this price has been calculated properly, whether the acquirer is reasonably having good conduct. Is he not a person who is already against whom SEBI has taken any action? SEBI will verify all that and SEBI will give its observations to the acquirer. Then the offer will open. Then the payment has to be made within 10 working days from the offer gets completed. Like in an IPO, you pay the money to the company. Here the person who wants to buy the share, he will pay the money to the public shareholder and the shareholder will tender his shares. And today all the public offer takes place only in DMAT mode. And we have also moved towards stock exchange mechanism. Entire process is done through the stock exchange. That is seamlessly taking place. You have to just fill up one DIS slip and give it to your DP, that is depository participant. That's all you have to do. The shares will get debited from your account and the money will be credited to your account. All takes place in a seamless manner. There is no paper is involved in this. There is a concept called competitive bid. You know what is competitive bid? It is like any other auction. Suppose there is an open offer made to Reliance Industries by Aditya Birla Group at a X price. Some other industrialist can say, no, he is paying X price, I will pay X plus 20 rupees more. So the second offer, which is called competitive bid. Whenever there is a, you know what is a hostile takeover? What is a normal takeover and what is a hostile takeover? What is the difference? Pardon? Correct. Exactly. That is a perfect answer. If the management of the company is not agreeing to the prospective acquirer, it is a hostile. Now recently you might have seen, all for the Twitter, Alphabet and one more company is trying to take over. If you have seen the CNBC or the Economic Times paper in the last 2-3 days, Alphabet is that, which is the holding company of Facebook. Google, sorry. Alphabet is the holding company of Google, and there is one more company, NICE or NIPE. They both are trying to take over the Twitter. So there could be a competitive bid. And if the Twitter management does not accept both of them, then it becomes a hostile bid. If they accept one of them, the one which is accepted becomes a ordinary normal takeover. Now when there is a normal takeover, the other person may feel aggrieved. He says, no, why should I miss this chance? So he can make a competitive bid. So basically when two or more people are competing to take over a particular company, that becomes a competitive bid. So when there is a competition, the investors will be benefited. That is why we have allowed. Only thing what we have put the rule is, competitive bid and the original bid should all open close on the same day. Only difference can be in the price. The rest will be the same. So that the investor can choose whether I will give the share to X or I will give the share to Y. Now, there is another thing which talks about disclosure. That is, when somebody is moving from 5%, 6%, 7%, we have mandated that disclose it to the stock exchange so that the investors will know, will there be an impending open offer? Will there be an open offer in the time to come? So if somebody is reaching 20%, so there is a possibility that if he reaches 25%, there will be an open offer. So the investors can take an informed decision. These disclosure requirements are being put in place. That is for the acquirer as well as for the promoters. Now this is something on a juridical comparison. How Indian Takeover Code is comparable with other countries. Some of the parameters I have given, and this is how the what you call framework is there. Now I will answer the question which you have asked. Now our question was that if the company does a buyback, I am having pre-buyback 24% out of 100. Company does buyback of 20 shares. So what happens is, I was having 24 out of 100, but after the company buys back, my shareholding will become, instead of 24 out of 100, it will become 24 out of 80. Then what happens? What is the percentage? 24 out of 100, we all know 24. 24 out of 80, will it go beyond 25? Yes. Then what happens? That is your question, no? Will that person be required to make open offer? What is the answer? Why? Huh? You are a lawyer or you are a... Huh? No, you must be studying law, because his answer is a law, legal answer. That is the legal angle. What he says is, it is a passive acquisition, it is not an active acquisition. We we fight the case in court now, so we use legal jargons. It is a passive acquisition, it is not an active acquisition. But unfortunately, under 1997 regulation, SEBI was taking a stand that you have to make an open offer. And the case went to SAT, that is Securities Appellate Tribunal. Any decision taken by SEBI is appealable in Securities Appellate Tribunal. So the SAT was actually found a dilemma. Because the law does not say, it only says acquisition. There is no prefix used, whether it is active or it is passive. Now, can you punish the person who has passively crossed 25? Logic versus legal. You know, in WhatsApp something is every time comes every 1 month. What is logic? And it may be logic but not legal, but it is legal but not logic. So under the 97 regulation, this was the, litigation going on. And finally, what you said is right, SAT gave this decision. After a prolonged battle, if it is a passive acquisition, he said you will not trigger the code. But then, as a regulator, we cannot allow that to happen. So what? Suppose a promoter is at 24. Because if you cross 25, you are getting this creeping acquisition benefit of 5%. So if somebody is at 24, he will use the company's influence in the company to go for a buyback. So a company goes for a buyback. So he goes from 24 to 28. Then, without complying with this open offer obligation, he gets the creeping acquisition limit of 5% every year. So from 28, every year he can buy 5% and then reach 51 in say 4 years time. And then he can take the company under full control. Can it be allowed? Now you see from the regulator's perspective, can it be done? So there will be a loophole. So you have to find a via media, you have to find a balance. We have to provide a level playing field between the passive acquirer, but at the same time, we should not allow him to enrich unduly. So what SEBI has done? You are not seeing the FAQ to get the answer. What is the answer? You tell me, you get the FAQ, no? For a question, what is the answer? Suppose somebody crosses 25% passively, what is the answer? Pardon? Within? Correct. 3 months time is given. Absolutely right. So, we have provided that you have to come back to 20, whatever you were, that is less than 25. Suppose from 24 you have moved to 27. You have to sell at least 3.1% shares within 90 days. If you do not do that, you will be deemed to be have triggered the code and you have to make the open offer. Any other specific question like this? Please free to ask. Mike, it's not audible. Bright line. We will discuss that. That is the case study. I have specifically chosen that. You will be the same thing. Jange 2, Jange movie only. Then it becomes 3:45. No, I have got time up to 4:30. No. So then we have to leave by 3:45 again. Same. That is why I have chosen that case. I know that is the most, what you call, topic which is discussed whenever there is a takeover. Nobody wants to know what is 25%, nobody wants to know what is 5%. Those things can be understood from the book. Now how will you determine control? Any other question? On control, when we discuss the case study, you will come to know. Any other question? Yes, please. Yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Correct. Yes. If you see at one point of time, if you see, go back to again your Google, you will get Tata Steel, which is earlier called Telco. What was the shareholding of Tata Group in Telco in 90s? What was the shareholding of Tata Group in Tisco or in Telco? Tisco is Tata Steel today. In Telco, Tata Motors today. What was the shareholding in that company at one point of time, say 25 years back? Can anybody guess? Less than 10%. And they were controlling the company. Okay, latest. In 2000, not very far, most of you are born and gone to the school. In ACC, Associated Cement Company, which is very popularly known as ACC, what was the shareholding of Tata Group? Because that was also called a Tata Group company. If you go to ACC annual report of 2000, it is called Tata Group company. What was the shareholding of Tata Group in that? %. They wanted to make a preferential allotment to cross that 15% because originally in 97 regulation, when SEBI came with the regulation, it was 10%. So when we increased it to 15% and we gave a window for companies to go, Tata Group moved a resolution in ACC board meeting to increase their stake. How many of you will believe if I say that the resolution was defeated? Which is a Tata Group company, that is what the annual report says, but in the board meeting, Tata Group moves a resolution to increase their stake by a preferential allotment, the resolution gets defeated. So from where we have reached? So over a period of time, people realized that once the globalization started, they said that anything if you have less than 51%, you will be a hostile target. That is why they all moved very fast. And then today what you say is, even in Reliance, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, the entire family holds how many percent? 54, 55, officially. I don't know actually, I don't know how much. But what is disclosed in the shareholding pattern is close to 54 to 55. The reason is, what you said is right. If you hold less than 51%, you are amenable for a hostile bid. And today in this globalization context, it is very dangerous. That is why you do not see many hostile takeovers. The hostile takeovers will take place in respect of companies where the promoter normally holds less than 30%. Somewhere more than 25 but less than 30. Such companies are target for hostile takeovers. But predominantly over a period of time, they have increased their shareholding to 51 plus. So that, as you said, whatsoever you make effort, unless the promoter sells, you can't take over the company. Okay, now we will move on to the So last 1 hour I was speaking, now you have to speak. Okay? Keep your mics on or you have to raise your voice. You all have the case study? Huh? You all have seen this case, you have read this case, so you are familiar with this case. See, there are two important concepts in takeover. One is called persons acting in concert. I was expecting somebody to ask this question. Nobody asked. Which is very, very unique to the concept of takeover. The second is how you exercise control over the company without having substantial stake. So what is persons acting in concert? In the normal parlance, what do you understand acting in concert? Huh? So you both of you are sitting, coming to the class together, you are acting in concert? No, that's why I am asking. Since you both of you come to the class and you sit together, can we say that you are acting in concert? Pardon? You are a holding company? Okay. If it is a holding company, subsidiary company, it becomes very easy. But somebody from Trivandrum and somebody from Kashmir comes together, how do you say that they are acting in concert? Yes, madam. You all have studied the takeover code before, huh? Very good. That is very important. Common objective for what? Yes. See, the problem in our context when we see in the newspaper and other things is, acting in concert will be for different purposes. If Mr. Murali Krishnan has come with me from Hyderabad office to here, he has come and with me acting in concert for the limited purpose of visiting this Nalsar University. If I do some crime somewhere in the airport, he is not partnering crime with me. You cannot say he is, that is very important. Common objective for what? For acquiring shares of that particular target company or controlling the affairs of that company. Unfortunately, people leave the second portion of this word, common objective. We both will go together to a restaurant and we have dinner and then come back. But the next day morning, I may make a hostile takeover on Reliance. Can somebody say that he is acting in concert with me? But that is what people say. We get a lot of complaints on that. No, yesterday I saw both of them in the restaurant. Yes, they were acting in concert as far as going to the restaurant. There is no doubt on that. But whether they had common objective to take over the company is important. So having mere common objective is not sufficient. But there are some exemptions where we presume they are deemed to be acting in concert. That is what he said. Holding and subsidiary company, because the board of directors of the subsidiary company is appointed by the holding company. So in that situation, a holding company and a subsidiary company is deemed to be acting in concert. One more example, can somebody say? Deemed to be acting in concert. Humorously put it, husband and wife. Unless you prove that you have divorced, we presume the husband and wife are acting in concert. Unless the wife or the spouse proves that they think differently and they do differently, we will presume that they are acting in concert. So we have defined who are all the persons who are deemed to be acting in concert. In case of a family, father, mother, son, daughter, their respective spouses, they are all considered as deemed to be acting in concert. So the onus is on the other person to prove otherwise. Otherwise, we will include all the shareholding. Similarly, holding company and subsidiary company. So that is very important. So here in this case, there are two issues which I have raised. Whether E Limited is required to make an open for acquisition of 24%. In what context can we say that E Limited is acting in concert with the promoter of the J Limited? That is actually the first question. He said no, in this, the promoter of the company holds 51%, E Limited buys 24%, remaining 25% is with the public. Can we say that the person who is holding 54%, 51%, and this entity which has purchased 24%, can they be called as acting in concert? Yes, please. Why? Huh? Okay. So because the majority shareholder cannot act in concert. Huh? Huh? Absolutely correct. Buyer, that is a fantastic answer. Buyer and seller can never act in concert because there is no common objective, there is opposite objectives. But in this case, the seller is company. Preferential allotment means what? Company is issuing the shares. It is not the person who is holding 51% is selling shares out of his stake. So the answer what you said is generally correct. That is actually the law which provides in one important case. I will give you the important case laws. That is the beautiful definition given by SAT as well as by High Court of Bombay and subsequently upheld by Supreme Court. The buyer and the seller cannot said to be acting in concert because the objective is opposite. One wants to sell, the other one wants to buy. But in this case, that 24% E Limited which acquired is issued by the company. So the question is, can E Limited act in concert with the promoter who holds 51%? Here the promoter is not a seller. Here the company is the seller. So you cannot say that company and E Limited acted in concert. That is accepted. Because E is the seller, company is the seller, E Limited bought. But the 51% shareholder is the promoter. Tell me, without his participating in passing the resolution to allot 24% to E Limited, can this proposal go through? To make a preferential allotment, you need a special resolution under Companies Act. Correct? Old Companies Act, section 81, 1A, new Companies Act, number I don't know, because I don't remember. So to make a preferential allotment, you have to pass a special resolution. To pass a special resolution, you need 75%. Without this 51% shareholder support, can it be achieved? Yes or no? Huh? No. So can you say that he is acting in concert? Yes, madam. Very good question. So what is the answer? Common objective lies where? That is exactly, yes madam, you give the answer. Use the mic, no, mic is next to you.
Cooperation is required. So I think in this case, without the consent of 51% shareholders, they cannot buy it and hence will be parties acting in
Correct.
concert.
Correct. So they are acting in concert?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. For your question, A is the existing holder. I am just giving an example. You are telling in the name of B, C is financing and buying the shares in the name of B. That is the point you are telling, no? See, the financier will be deemed to be acting in concert. That is what we will say. The financier will also be considered as acting in concert because, as he said, there should be a common objective. Now, I will give you an example like this. As a financier, I am financing him, say, 100 crore. I will see, as a regulator, I will see whether in the past, whether I have financed him, whether he is normally borrowing from people. Suppose if he has borrowed only once 100 crore from me, from him, and used that 100 crore to buy shares of some company, both will be considered as acting in concert. Because this is a factual information to be obtained. But suppose he is a regular financier, he is an NBFC. He gives loan to him, he gives loan to him, he gives loan to him, everybody he gives loan. And he does not know what is he going to do with that money, then he can claim innocence and then he may not be booked. But still he will be liable as an acquirer, but he will be responsible as a person acting in concert if the factual information proves that he was aiding and abetting in this. So for that what we do is, that is where the investigation comes. So there is a department called corporate finance. They will see whatever is regularly going through, no problem. But when there is a complaint like this, suppose he is making an open offer and he is financing him, and in the past he has financed him and he has purchased some shares, then whether this person are acting in concert, they will refer the case to me. As an investigation department, I will call for the bank statement from both of them. Then I will call for the call records and check when they met, do they meet frequently, or just 1 day before this borrowing they met. Who are the people whom he has financed? There are cases where we found the person who is financing has sold his only house and given the money to him, and he buys the shares of a particular company. Now here who is the actual acquirer? The person who sold the house. He doesn't want his name to come, he is actually using his name as a bigamy. So he will become the acquirer, actually he will become the person acting in concert. Although the shares should have been purchased in his name. If you see in the demat account, his name will be there. But he was the one who actually perpetuated this. So this will need an investigation to do. Whether he financed him, whether he is a regular financier, was he aware that what for he is taking the money? So all that will depend upon the facts and circumstances of the case. Yes, common objective and concerted action. That is what the case says. There has to be common objective and there has to be a concerted action. That means he must be aware that he is giving money to him for that purpose. But that intention we will prove based on his behavior, circumstances. If he has lent only to him only once in a lifetime, we will definitely suspect. But he is regularly giving money to people, then he will say, I don't know that what he will do with that money. And he never told me that he is going to buy the Reliance shares. Okay? Yes, madam. You want to say something? So, whether the promoter of J Limited and E Limited acted in concert or no, what is the answer? There has to be only yes or no. She said yes, because without the support of him, the resolution would not have been passed. What do you say? Huh? Huh? Partially right. Okay. What is the second? What is the answer to the second question? That comes to your issue. Whether rights available to E Limited through the agreements amounts to control being exercised by E Limited over J Limited. See, these are all the important clauses in the agreement entered into between J Limited and E Limited. So, whether these rights give power to E Limited to control the affairs of the company. Tell me, you only raised this query, no? Whether these rights can amount to acquisition of control or not. Huh? Pardon? Any other answer? Will these rights give control to the E Limited over the J Limited? Okay, one is right to appoint majority. Then? You said they have veto rights. Yes. So those veto rights do not give them that control? Huh? Which case? Subcom, huh? Why? Okay, if this is not giving control to E Limited, why did SEBI come with the discussion paper on bright lights? Tell me. If these rights do not give control to the E Limited, what was the need for SEBI to put the discussion paper on bright lines? It is subjective. The definition itself is subjective, except the first clause what is said, the right to appoint majority, that is number. If you have 7 out of 5 out of 6 out of 11, you have majority. It is very easy. But apart from the number, when you have these type of arrangements, how do you determine? Okay. This is actually Jet ATR case only. I thought you might have seen in Google and you would have read the SEBI order itself, which is on the SEBI website. I do not know. Did you read the SEBI order? Did you read? See, first of all, please remember, this is an airline company. Under Indian aviation rules, first thing is, a foreign airline cannot control an Indian airline company. That is the rule of the land. SEBI comes below that. Okay? Under the civil aviation rules, which is supreme, no Indian airline company can be controlled by a foreign airline company. That is number one. So, when this agreement was entered into, in fact, this agreement itself was a diluted agreement. When they originally passed the resolution to allot preferential allotment of 24%, they knew that by number they are not triggering the takeover code, but they had too many powers in those agreements. Then and one of the point very cleverly put by the lawyers is, this agreement has no basis unless it is approved by the Civil Aviation Authority. Because you can't, it is like, you can't get into a wagering contract. We can't make an agreement to kill him tomorrow. It is ipso facto illegal, that's all. Whether the agreement is written, whether it is a oral agreement, whether there is consideration is there or not, it does not matter. The arrangement to do itself ipso facto illegal. So if there is an agreement which directly or indirectly gives control over an Indian airline company to a foreigner, it is against the law of land. So it cannot happen. So when they made this agreement, they approached the SEBI, they approached the Ministry of Civil Aviation, they approached Ministry of Finance. We all said that you dilute the agreement, and then finally they got this agreement, which was also considered by SEBI as reasonably okay. But we have one more regulator in the system now. We have, SEBI, we have RBI first, we have SEBI, we have IRDA, we have PFRDA. Now latest one more has come. How many of you remember? Anybody remembers? Which is very popular in mergers and acquisition concept. Competition Commission of India. Now, any merger beyond a particular combined entity's value, it has to get a clearance from Competition Commission of India. Now, when this airline company approached CCI, believe me, Civil Aviation cleared it. Ministry of Finance cleared it. SEBI cleared it. DIPP, Department of Industrial Promotion and Policy, allowed this FDI investment running into about 600-700 crores into this company, allowed. Money has come. Shares were allotted. CCI put a googly that they took into account the airline business they will be dominating in the overall Indian sky. Because under this arrangement, there is a code share. If you travel by jet, if you are a frequent flyer in Etihad, you will get points. If you are traveling by Etihad, you will get a frequent flyer in jet, you will get points. So the passengers of Etihad and the jet was treated as one. So Competition Commission said, in their giving clearance, that they exercise control as far as airline operations are concerned, taking the number of airports they will have, parking lot, the